Thank you for joining us. Pardon? You causing trouble already? So this panel, financial education, how we design it, how we deliver it. I've been chasing financial education for years, and the British, it just doesn't seem to happen. We don't seem to have any. I've had a really good look round, and it's non-existent. Just recently, the government have shown some interest. So whilst I was nervous, now I'm really nervous. Because that's terrifying me. So it's a case of, and what they've done is, so I'm a private investor, right? I'm a private investor basically because I've bundled my way through over the years, started off with a pet, this kind of thing, and I am where I am, right? And I'm where I am because I just found my way, because there's nobody to ask, there's no education, but I found myself here, right? So we're the people in this room that have learnt to swim. We're the swimmers, we know what we're doing, we've learned how to do it. The government sat up poolside trying to think how to swim without getting wet. So they want to engage retail, they want the retail investors, so on and so forth. So they've gone to investment banks because they must know what retail want, which is like asking a wolf what the chicken would like for lunch. So we feel we have to put something together ourselves. We have to think about what it is to be in a private investor, what is needed, what we need to know. Once we think about what it needs to be, then we need to actually put it together. So that's where the actual financial education packages come in. So on the panel today, you've heard about me. We've got Robert Martin, CEO of a charity, who has a deep perspective on society, let's say. He's seeing what it's like. We have Tom, who's from the investment trust world, which is about creating portfolios. And then we move on to Mandy Gill from Chartered Institute of Securities Investment. They produce education packages. They know what they're doing. They're good at that. They come from the professional side. People in this room, if you've not done a CISI education course, you should do. They're very good. You will learn. Then we move on to Andy from Munny Group. Munny Group comes from the bottom up, okay? Working on financial education in schools and the like, but also by some strange twist of fate, you're doing a lot with the football clubs, Manchester City, which is a really good football club. And then this other one called...
No, it's not.
There's another one in Manchester, I believe. I can't remember.
Yeah, they were red.
They used to be big, didn't they? Cooled off.
Yeah.
Then we have Patrick. Patrick, from the Mail on Sunday, done an awful lot for looking after shareholder rights, particularly on the AGM front, digital AGMs. Patrick's been very much in our corner. So, Robert, would you like to take it from there, please?
Thank you very much. I think one of the real fundamentals is that good decisions are amplified more nowadays than maybe before, and bad decisions are amplified more nowadays than before. Our young people's financial literacy in a structurally declining economy or somewhere that with the cost of living choices are more difficult, things sorting themselves out and just being okay is probably not going to happen for our young people today. You won't sort of fall into just buying a house. You won't just fall into good investment decisions. And at the same time, you will fall into bad ones if you don't understand them very well, with the social media aspect, with YouTube, with poor advice being just as prevalent as good advice. So when it comes to the young people that I work with in the charity, their transition to adulthood now is so much more important. And the education that they provide, we provide them, and the decisions they make set them up almost for life to a more profound level than maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. And that really puts significant importance into the things that Danny was talking about. The second point to that is what are the decisions that they are making? Are they the decisions that they are making the same ones as people here today are making? Is the importance if you talk about resource allocation and you talk about where you spend your time, is that the same for our 18, 19, 20-year-olds as it is for investors later in life. One good example of that is there's 11 million people on universal credit and in work benefit. To not understand financial decision making on a benefit that has a taper rate of 55% in the pound, which disincentivizes work and investment profoundly, but also the huge opportunity, for example, for investing in your pension, because the taper rate is taken out after the pension contribution. So the government almost incentivizes pension contributions to 75% in the pence in the pound. These decisions that our young people are making, and that's just one example, are different to the decisions that older people are making. And if we're going to design a package for them and we're going to understand what they need, we also need to look at what financial decisions they are making at that point in their lives. So sort of two real clear points of the importance and the prevalence of it, but also let's think about a package of support and education that reflects their decisions, not the decisions of people that are in a different stage in their life.
So you see financial education as very much cradle to grave, because the government, again, are talking very much about in schools, whereas it goes through life, doesn't it?
It really does go through life, but there are just some simple fundamentals that our young people need to understand about money first before we get to investing. One of the biggest things that I really, really worry about is people not understanding debt and investments, where they've got credit card debt that is a higher percentages of their investment returns, and they see that as a success because they have investment returns. Simple concepts around money, markets, banks, we've heard a lot about ISAs and things like that today. These basic concepts that can be instilled at 14, people can understand these things at that young, that then when they come onto the education as they transition into adulthood, they have firmer foundations that allows it to be a lifelong learning rather than making bad decisions like overdrafts, like debt, like credit cards, that then they spend their entire time in their 20s and 30s trying to get out of without making the good investments. Because I think one of the real differentiators now is financial literacy, not necessarily how much you earn in PAYE. With the welfare state being so profound and the taxation at the top being also so profound, so many people are actually take home pretty similar across the board of the middle incomes. So financial literacy is almost the differentiator with people in their 20s and 30s now. And that's the thing that we are seeing as the successful people are not necessarily the ones with the biggest salary of the year, but the ones that can do the correct things with that salary.
Okay, thank you. Tom, you deal in the investment trust world. You see how people put those together?
Yeah, I think investment trusts are quite an interesting sort of microcosm of some of the issues around awareness in terms of investing and looking after your money. If you look at investment trusts, they've been around for a tremendous amount of time. They've been great sources of wealth creation. And, you look at these companies, they've had multi-decades of track records. Not only that, they provide access to otherwise inaccessible assets in terms of private equity, venture capital, renewable energy, all of which asset classes that young people in particular are interested in investing in. If you speak to any of my friends outside the industry and any of my siblings, never heard of it. They wouldn't know what an investment trust is. If you do ask them what they're invested in, it's either, I don't invest, it's all in my sort of cash account, savings account, or it's, well, I do a bit of crowdfunding for startups and I've done a bit of crypto. Now, that's not a problem if you understand the risks, which to different extents people do or do not. But it does point to a gap that there's definitely an information gap in how much people know about what's available for them in terms of investing. And also just the lack of knowledge over, what are the time horizons with which I need to invest in. And so what's the answer to this? I'm not entirely sure. But if you look at where people are getting their information, it's purely on social media. I think the FCA had a survey out coming this year. It was 85% of investment decisions made by 18 to 40-year-olds were influenced heavily by social media. Now, the way those platforms work is by grabbing short attention. And it's very hard to penetrate those and say, look, think about long-term strategic investment objectives rather than, this crypto going to the moon. So that's the backdrop for which young people are trying to invest. I think the other thing to recognize is that, this is probably a generation of young people that are having to actually self-invest at a lot earlier age and for longer, purely because, if you look at the average age of a first-time buyer, it's gone up from 25 to 33 over the last 30 years, and actually it's 35 in London. So that's next to 8 to 10 years of people sitting on capital that have previously been tied up in property. That they need to be educated on how to manage that against their time horizons, against their objectives, rather than sitting there being like, I don't know what to do with this money, and either making mistakes or not investing it properly. So I think it's how do we start penetrating, social media is here to stay. So how do we start penetrating that social media to use it for good? But also, how do we create other channels of education? When I started investing, I got a few £100 for my first job, and I thought, right, I'll whack it in ISA, and I just bought 3 stocks randomly. All went down, sold them after 6 months. I didn't understand how to make those decisions or the investment horizons I was actually aiming for. So I think we need to create earlier systems of education so that when people go into the wider world, they're not going to be fooled by maybe short-term gains made on dodgy Instagram adverts. So that's where I'd say the crucial battleground is.
Yeah, a couple of points there.
Yeah.
Crypto going to the moon was mentioned. From my experience, when you invest in crypto, you actually end up paying for somebody else to go to the moon, and you stay exactly where you were. Doesn't seem to work out. And the other thing is risk. Risk has been mentioned a lot. Risk is relentlessly mentioned. The way you reduce risk is education. I never feel as though I'm taking a risk investing. I feel perfectly safe. If I went skydiving, that would be a risk. I've not a clue how to do it, and I need a fairly decent parachute. So education reduces risk. If you know what you're doing, you're in a much better shape. So yeah, crypto, we all have our view. And you think in terms of the long-term education.
Yeah, because funny enough, I actually, in pride of this event, I said, right, I'm going to Google top tips for someone who's starting investing, and Investopedia came up. I clicked on the link and it said, don't speculate, do your proper research, look at the fundamentals. And all the adverts on that page were for cryptocurrency exchanges. So I thought, even when I'm trying to do the due diligence around learning how to invest, that's the advertising I get. I spend all my time looking at investment trust, and the algorithm hasn't picked up that and shown me any of those options. It's just showing me for crypto exchanges. And again, I'm not a crypto skeptic. I'm not trying to bash investing in it. It's just knowing the full spectrum of how to invest properly before you make more speculative investments in something like a crypto.
I think referring to crypto as more speculative seems to be the
balanced.
politically correct way of approaching it, because they all get upset. So we have the problems. We see what needs to be done, but then we move across to Mandy with CISI. You come down from the top. You deal with the professional education. You put good, solid, true, valid education packages together. I will say that I did approach 3 young female influences in the financial world. They all wanted paying to be here. So we don't really do that. We don't really pay people. So moving on to Mandy, you do real packages, real education. How do you feel you can solve this? What do you think you can do for this?
Well, we're all sounding as if we're saying exactly the same thing, actually. I think we're all on the same page. Traditionally, our safe space is professional vocational education. So education for practitioners, for people who are currently expert in financial services. But increasingly, we are thinking about this question: what does it take to make Britain financially literate? And I think from my point of view, the real issue here is we can't be making half of the population financially literate. Actually, what we've got to do is make the whole population financially literate, because we know some of the time bombs that are currently sort of building up within society, particularly around the level of pension cover, women in pensions, all kinds of issues. So we are thinking increasingly about what we have to do. And I think quite often, we've started a piece of work which is looking about how we develop a financial literacy program for schools, which I know others are involved in as well. And it's really interesting, when you start that piece of work, you get 2 messages. One message is, there's loads of products for schools. And the other message is, from young people who are in that space, I got absolutely nothing on financial literacy while I was at school. So what's the gap? And I think from our point of view, one of the major gaps is actually who's doing the educating and what skills do they have? Because I think a lot of people, we are talking now about how do you put financial literacy into schools? Well, as with history, as with English, as with maths, you need subject matter experts in the schools to deliver the relevant content. So the programme that we're currently developing for young people, well, we're talking about young people, but actually I'll widen the brief out in a moment. But the programme we're currently developing is actually as much about equipping the educator as it is about the young person, because what we don't want to do is create a package, make it available as an educational charity for free for schools to access, and then have a bunch of educators to say, I can't do that. I know nothing about financial services or financial literacy. So we're aiming at as much as the educator as at the person who is being educated. And we also want to make sure that that package reaches everybody. So I know there are some great products out there. A lot of them involve using apps, which can be downloaded. We don't want to make assumptions about the resources that people have access to, whether that's physical resources or the resources at home. Because actually, if you're not growing up in an environment where people talk about finance at the kitchen table, then, who is there to turn to if you come across a tricky question during the course of your educational, your financial literacy education? So it also has to be a package which doesn't depend on half of the stuff being delivered through the home setting or through the carer setting. So as I said, we're working on a package at the moment which could be delivered ideally to young people in any setting, but could also be expanded into different kinds of educational settings. So, for example, young people who are currently in the youth offending system. So we're talking with one youth offending scheme in the Northwest. They're very interested in piloting the package because people might be out of school, but they've still got to have an education. And actually, sometimes it's really important to focus on giving them the practical skills around things like financial literacy rather than the kind of classic academic education. So the idea is it's got a really super broad base. So that's one thing we're doing. We've actually got some brilliant qualifications already on our slate, and one of them is a level 2 qualification, Fundamentals of Finance, which is level 2 is roughly a GCSE equivalent. Interestingly, we have always positioned that as a starter qualification for young people who are thinking about a career in finance. Actually, it's a really brilliant qualification for any young person to take. So we're starting to talk to schools about, actually, would you like to broaden this out a little bit and think about it as a part of your general offer? Again, subject to the educator being available. But it's a really fantastic qualification for young people to take, to give them that sort of extra vocational understanding, that skills-based understanding. May take them into a career, may not, but it's very likely to serve them well as they progress through life. And then I think other than that, for us, it's all about, we're trying to do as much as possible around some of those national conversations that are going on, particularly around things like pensions. So we are looking at the moment, this isn't in place yet, so don't all rush to it, but we've got a great learning platform which is available to our members. Our members use it for continuing professional development. We're looking at making some stuff on that free. So we're going to put it in front of the paywall. And that is obviously about sort of showing people our wares. We want people to come and join us as a member. But actually, we also want to put some stuff in front of the paywall, which is about just enabling the general population to educate itself on relevant content around financial literacy. So we're looking at the right kind of content to make available to anybody who wants to access it as well. So what we're trying to do is kind of contribute to that national conversation in a variety of ways. But I think the key thing for us as an educational charity is that it's about including everybody in the conversation. And really, this should not be a conversation that only happens within part of the population.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of points there. It seems as though creating this financial education package is one problem, but then the next problem is the delivery of it.
Yeah.
Because how can it be delivered? Because you go to see the teachers don't know how to deliver it. They don't know what it is because they're hungry for it too. They need that knowledge themselves.
Yeah.
So that seems to be a key problem. And the education, so what they're thinking here is there an education package for teaching somebody how to invest in equities? Or is that a little bit scary to everybody? I know I've done beginner groups in the past, and I've mentioned platform. You need a platform. They don't even know what a platform is. They don't know where the beginning is. I mentioned AJ Bell, and someone said, "Oh, that's a scam." That. You're like, no. AJ Bell's a real thing. It's not a scam. What are you talking about? So they're getting this bizarre information. They don't know where the beginning is or what it consists of. So would CISI think in terms of an education package for retail investment, or is that sort of slightly bit weird? Is that something that?
I mean, in terms of sort of developing, whether it's, a qualification or CPD, we will very much respond to market demand. I mean, if there is a business case for something, if there's a genuine need for something, then we will always have a conversation about developing it. I mean, in terms of I completely agree with what you're saying, Danny, that it's really important that if you want people to be educated, you have to have the educators to deliver the education, which is why we're putting the focus on that in the financial literacy product that we're currently developing. But I think as well, we've all got to be conscious of the fact that there is, this is unfortunately currently one of those professions where there is an asymmetry in the relationship that exists between the advisor and the client. And the more we can do to educate people, I think, around that, two benefits. Number one, you don't get people sort of saying, who are AJ Bell? Number two, you get a greater level of trust, because the more people are informed themselves, the more they can test and challenge the advice that's being given and place greater reliance on it, knowing that, they're not being sort of taken for a ride or given bad advice or whatever it might be. So it's also about, in the long term, enhancing trust in the profession. The more that people know themselves, I think the more we grow trust in the profession.
And trust in the profession is something that the profession has struggled with, isn't it? And regaining that
Absolutely.
trust. And what we find with the British is that as soon as there's a trust issue, you lose another decade.
Yeah.
So regaining that trust is imperative.
And again, we're losing the industry is losing the decade, but also the investor is losing the decade as well. So there's more and more alienation. So it's really the whole point about education. Yes, it's empowering the individual. Yes, it's enabling them to know more and understand more about how finance works, how the economy works, but also it's closing that gap between the person as the client and the advisor as well.
Okay, thank you. And Andy, you're coming at financial education from a slightly different angle.
Yep.
You have got an app. You have got things going on. I've been through it with you. I was astonished. I thought it was superb. And you're doing on the financial education with schools, and you're also getting involved in the footballers and the cricket. And it's weird. I mean, the footballers, they suffer from the footballer lifestyle, don't they?
They do, yeah. I mean, we approached this a slightly different angle in that I'd spent around about a decade working in debt advice. So as a debt advisor, giving people IVAs, bankruptcies, debt managements, and sitting there thinking there is so much focus on the cure, like the amount of companies that are in that world, the money that's made in that world. It just seemed really bizarre. So I'm sitting thinking, why is no one focused on the prevention? Why are we not preventing these problems but making money from the cure? Seems really bizarre. And there's lots of conspiracy theories I'm sure you can look into. So I then launched a company aimed at schools back in 2011. So I've been doing this for quite some time. It went really, really well. Similar problems that we encountered in terms of schools having very little money and very little time.
Yeah.
So even if it was free, they had no time in the curriculum to shoehorn it in. So that was just something we found challenging. The big thing was working with cohorts, so schools that were like in clusters, for example, or local councils up in the northwest, which worked really well. And then I put that on the shelf for a few years because it wasn't quite being sustainable as a business, and revisited it a few years back. But this time the focus was on employee well-being rather than pupil well-being, if that makes sense. So we started working with a couple of employers of quite large sizes, ended up working then with Peninsula Group. For some of you may know Peninsula, that are HR advisory firm. We work alongside them as their financial education partner, and Health Assured, who are an EAP provider. So we're their partner in financial education. So that's really been our big focus, going into workplaces and delivering either in-person events, whether that's workshops or one-to-one coaching, right the way through to online webinars, an app, and a virtual money coach, which is all the rage. So that's what we've been doing for a few years. And then randomly, the sporting world and the school world kind of opened its doors a little bit. So we now work with the PFA, the Premier League, Man City, United, Everton, and a few other people I can throw names in. But it's interesting because even though they're earning obscene money for people at 17, 18, the education gaps still exist. And they just have the ability to make bigger mistakes and bigger problems. We're working with the City under 18s lads. There's some there earning 2, 3, 4 grand a week at 17, but they've got 9 months council tax arrears. They haven't paid it. They didn't realise to pay it. So some really simple, fundamental. I think one of your points was fundamental stuff. Some really basic stuff. So we've created a whole package around atomic money habits, which are starting from being, say, 16 through to being an adult and being a grown-up and being in the big bad world of money. But our big focus is on those teachable moments and how we make sure we lean in at the right time. And that's why I think the academy in sport and schools in particular, there's some real opportunities there to educate people before they start to use money and get access to it.
Because we've had some big names go bankrupt in the football world.
Huge, yeah.
Names that, I mean, Brian Robson springs to mind.
Yep.
How did that happen?
So
I mean,
Brian,
that's like a national disgrace that he should.
Yeah, Brian's actually an ambassador of ours. I was with him on Tuesday at Carrington doing some work with the under-18s at United. So from our point of view, having people that are from that world is really important because it's quite political and you've got to do a lot of name dropping to get in the door of these places. So we work with a few ex-rugby players in rugby league. I was on with them this morning. Within cricket, we're working with hopefully Ben Stokes. We've signed today and Paul Horton that used to play for Leicester. So you have to work with these ambassadors to get into those places. But ultimately, the question is, how do we make Britain financially literate? Well, the way we do that is by working with cohorts of people. You can't do it one-on-one. You can't approach 70 million people and educate them one-on-one. You've got to meet them where they are. And where they are is in work. They're in school. They're in these cohorts. And, we're quite fortunate. Some of the cohorts are quite big. So, Health Assured have got 13 million UK lives under their umbrella. That's 39% of the workforce. And we work with that 39% of the workforce, which is great. But there's another 61% of the workforce that we don't work with in that case. So that's how we're trying to do it. And we built something we think scalable, which is another challenge.
Absolutely.
Delivering this en masse is quite tough. Everyone wants something slightly different. But the big focus for us is that we're a fiercely independent education business. So we only get paid to educate, which presents its challenges. Because some firms will say they want to pay for it, but they don't. So making it sustainable is a challenge, but it's going well. And that's what we're really focused on. And I think, if I really think about what does it look like in the future, or what should it look like in the future, I often think about driving. I guess most of us in the room drive. We'll have had to do driving lessons and driving tests, and depending on what age you are, you may have to do a hazard perception test or a theory and all these different things that go with it. And that all happens usually for people at 17, 18, and then you get your car and away you go. If we just gave keys to people at 18 without any of those things happening, we'd experience what we experience in finance, which is what currently happens. So you turn 18, you get an overdraft, you get a credit card, and away you go. There's no one sitting down going, when you turn 16, you go through this process. Once you've passed those processes or completed that journey, you can then access money and finance. So we're on the steering committee with the London Foundation for Banking and Finance, and we're talking about something fairly disruptive, but a money license in the same way you have a driving license, I think would totally revolutionise Britain's financial literacy.
Because Britain's suffering from this lack of education.
Yeah.
We're now being left behind. We're now suffering. I like the prevention rather than cure thing. I also work with Citizens Advice. They do loads and loads of cure. And similar to yourself, it's like, well, where's the prevention?
Yeah.
Surely we need to be preventing. You can get debt advice left, right and centre.
Yep.
What you can't get is prevention advice. Mm-hmm. And it's like, aren't we missing this piece out here? But Britain's in a bit of a crisis with its businesses. There is a lack of education. There is a lack of engagement. Companies need investors, and they seem to be waking up to this a little bit now. Done a lot of work with Patrick in regards to the AGMs, this move towards digital, which is horrific. But the companies need to work with us as well. So if companies are engaging, the shareholders and so on and so forth, it makes the whole of Britain work better. So we're not aiming for something, we don't want a TikTok, FaceTube, blooming nonsense. We want something real. We want to engage properly. We want to think about what it is, how we devise it, how we deliver it. We want real education for the good of Britain. So Patrick, you've been working for shareholders for quite some time.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. My job is to ask questions of people, usually in business and finance, and to explain things. So that is my financial education. I'm a minority of a very handful of people. I think the problem with financial education is it's in people's interest to make it sound more complicated than it really is. Most people's financial situation is fairly straightforward. Unfortunately, most of those people can't afford, even if they do need financial advice, they can't afford it. Whereas if you are financially educated, you can usually afford the advice, and you may or may not need it. And there's this conundrum. And I think it's about breaking through jargon, ultimately, because I'm always reminded, I was at the John Stepek session earlier, and he talked a lot about the financial crisis in 2008. In 2007, if anyone, whether they were financially educated or not, had decided to ask the very obvious question to anyone in an investment bank, what is a collateralized debt obligation, please, on the back of a postcard, we may not be where we are now or have been for the last 15 years. It's asking, having the confidence, and a lot of people clearly don't have the confidence, to ask what often is a very obvious question. What do you mean? Could you explain that to me? And people don't like to show that they are unsure or even ignorant of these basic financial facts. And I think the panel, we've gone through almost the life cycle of how you get that confidence. And it is through education. And it starts at the beginning. It starts at home. I think there's research that shows that attitudes towards money are formed as early as 7 years of age. Mm-hmm. Then it's obviously the schools have a big role to play. When I last looked, financial education was on the curriculum, but it's wrapped up in like maths and citizenship. Mm-hmm. The really interesting areas of, for instance, economics today aren't on the mathematical side of things. It's on the behavioural side of things. It's got nothing to do with numbers. It's what people do with the information that is readily available to everyone. So there's much more that we can do, I would have thought, in that sphere. Take it out of maths, which is a big turn-off for most people, and put it into behaviours, which I think are much more relatable. And then, of course, in the workplace, the role of employers is hugely important. Most employers, particularly SMEs, they don't like pensions. It's a cost, and it's a burden, and financial education is not for them. Big companies have got the resources to do that, but most people work for small companies. So that employers in and of themselves aren't going to solve the problem either. And neither will the private sector. So clearly, we talked about trust earlier. I think financial services companies have got a lot of work still to do to rebuild that trust, because rightly, a lot of people think they're being sold stuff when they are being given financial guidance or advice or whatever you want to call it. And also, I mean, there just isn't any money in it to be made, starting from scratch, advising people what to do. Most of the time, I worked on in another life, I worked on an account when I was in PR for a startup which was backed by the founder of Munny supermarket. And their aim was to improve financial education, so better financial decisions were made. And they offered guidance but not advice. And basically, you could fill it, you could do it online, but you could speak to a proper IFA as well. And most of the time, people were being advised not to invest to get themselves out of financial difficulties. You're advised to pay off your most expensive debt first, put some money aside for a rainy day, and then think about investing. And it's, people are just so far away from the stock market at that level that, you're talking about just a completely different world to the one most people in this room inhabit.
Thank you. So, strong panel. We've also got a strong audience, and I can see we've got some friends in the audience. We've got big folks who are here in strength. We've got ShareSoc here. We've got Cameron, Youth MP, doing wonders for the average age. Thank you for coming. Is there any questions you would like to put to the panel at this stage? Sir?
Right, I agree with everybody here. I run a financial trading company. I sell to banks, asset managers, custodians, commodity houses. One of the things that me and my colleagues have been talking about is financial education to the youngsters. big problem is with the government. I'm not a member of their club. I'm only a small company, but I've been in the business 30 years. I have very good trainers, lots of wisdom, and trying to help educate younger people. I am working with someone and looking at private schools.
Yep.
Which is a bit of a ball thing. But that is the big problem. I have some very good trainers who would love to help the and they know all about the products. They've been in the industry.
Well, I'll address that first. So I've been in this shareholder world now for years, and there has been nothing going on from governments from as far back. The fact that we're discussing it now, well, we can take it back as far as we like. The Tell Sid campaign was an advertising campaign to sell things. It didn't really engage anybody in financial education, but this Tell Sid thing seemed like a good idea. It didn't make us all financially literate from then on. We seem to have skipped that bit. It's just recently that it seems to have got some kind of interest from a government. I am speaking with, the key person seems to be Callum Anderson. I am speaking to him. I am kind of hoping that things go right. But I've never seen it before. I've never seen the government show an interest before. And you do well to get through a day. I mean, I'm Yorkshire born. Even I open my wallet every day. You know, I mean, it is what it is. It's your money affects everything. It's always there. But no education. There should be a driving license.
Yeah, I think to answer your point as well with schools, it's interesting that they on the curriculum there's probably a bigger problem, and it's driven by the curriculum that schools have to abide by. It's not built for today's world, unfortunately. The work we do in schools is one of two things. It's either a school that's proactively sort out our services and we put together a package for them that works for them and their audience, whether that's lunch and learns, coaching, the AI Money coach, whatever it may be, or it's a school that is reacting to a curriculum need. And an example of that, we did some work with a school up in Lancaster, and their exact request was, we need to teach our year 10s about payday loans. And I was like, well, they don't earn money yet, and payday loans aren't really as big as they were maybe 10 years ago, but on their curriculum, it had the statement, they must learn about payday loans. So we put together a package for them. We went in and we delivered, I think it was 10 sessions to a couple of hundred pupils. But the pupils in the room were thinking, so what's a loan? Never mind a payday loan, what's a loan? So the dots just aren't being joined, and the curriculum is driving the wrong behaviours. So the schools are kind of hamstrung a little bit, and that the lack of time and money they have is then compounded by a pretty poorly put together curriculum around financial education being shoehorned into maths or
How to open a bank account.
yeah, there's about 25 steps before we should teach them that, but that was what was on their curriculum to tick off the box, and that's what we see a lot, to be honest.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel want to come in at that stage?
I mean, just a bit of a slightly flippant comment, but to what Patrick was saying earlier about CDOs, I mean, I watched The Big Short for the first time this weekend, so I now know what a CDO is, courtesy of Selena Gomez. But actually, what a brilliant education piece. The way in which so you could do worse starting any education program than get people to watch, including young people, to watch that film. Mm-hmm. And the way they do it, with various sort of like Anthony Bourdain and various other people sort of chip in and do the explaining. Mm-hmm. And the whole point is it's an education piece. And it's actually really, really good. So in terms of sort of starting off and putting an education program together, we could do worse than watch that, I think.
Or tune into Martin Lewis.
Absolutely. Yeah, if easy thing.
3 million people signed up for the car finance redress scheme.
Well, Martin Lewis is a phenomena, and he knows he's a phenomena, and he's a bit like, can I not have a week or two off now, because I'm a bit tired now, because he's become such the go-to person. We need another go-to person or a go-to body, but we need to be doing it on scale. We need scale with this thing. We need to hit the full population. We need to find out it's got to be scalable. We've got to design it. We've got to deliver it en masse and fairly quickly. So we need to pull all the small boats perspective together. We need to make it happen. Sir?
What are your definitions of financial literacy, and what would you regard as relevant content specifically with investment in mind?
Anybody want to take that one at this stage?
Very good question. I suppose, I mean, from my point of view, it depends where you start and it depends what your audience is. I mean, we're deliberately sort of constructing something which is around key stage 2. So that's sort of 11 to 14-year-old. We've made an initial decision to avoid going in at the kind of primary school level. So we want to go in at 11 to 14, building a little bit on the maths that they've already got. But I mean, the outline program is covering all kinds of content, but it's trying to gamify it as well, so that they understand about making, first of all, good purchasing decisions, then when to save and when to spend, a little bit about risk, but just trying to get them to kind of pull all of these concepts together, so that you get a kind of, I mean, almost a sort of, rather than having them. The young people sort of understand things in isolation. They're seeing it, the financial education as a whole, rather than biting it off in little bits.
Okay, Robert?
What is your definition of financial literacy?
What's my definition of financial literacy? My definition, I think, would be someone who is financial literacy enables someone to make sensible financial decisions for themselves. And which suit them and which work for them.
Robert, just bring you in there.
So, in a very basic ways, can you balance a budget? Is there, are you spending more than what you have? Before you get to retail investment, you must have surplus money at the end of the month. And I think when we come to education, so many of our young people don't understand living within your means. When you go to university, it was mentioned about getting an overdraft on the first day. Some very, very intelligent young people walk into some very, very good universities and take out a £2,500 overdraft, which disappears in a few months. We really spend a lot of time within the charity just preaching living within your means. And that's how you get a road to retail investing outside of a pension that you're automatically enrolled in. How do you invest in a stock? I mean, unless you're doing it with debt, which is a different thing. You've got to have money at the end of the month. And that comes from behaviour. And the behavioural decisions that you make throughout that month will define what happens at the end of the month. And I think if we're going to teach our young people anything, it's to live within your means, I suppose. And that would be a financially literate young person.
Okay. We are going to wrap up there, I'm afraid. Ahead of this, I spoke to everybody on the panel ahead of this, and every conversation I had took longer than 40 minutes, okay, individually. This needs to be a starting point. And the fact they're having a starting point now in 2025 is ridiculous. But we need a starting point. We need to build on it. We need to be working with these people. We need to be working with the shareholder associations, and we need to make it happen. And we need to try and manage the government so they don't do something that doesn't really work out. So I'm going to end the session there. A big thanks to the panel, and hopefully we can build on this and go further. And thanks for everybody attending today. Okay? Thank you.